Our first presenter is James Boland from SLR Consulting, and he will tell us about the acoustic design of prisons.
Hi everyone, I'm James Boland. I'm just going to give you an overview of a paper that I'm going to be presenting at the Acoustics 2023 conference in Sydney next week. This is some work that I've done in collaboration with Dr. Helen Farley from the University of Canterbury, and I work as an acoustics consultant for SLR Consulting in New Zealand. Dr. Farley researches education and technology in prison. She's been doing that for a long time. She's very collaborative, so she sends me papers and journal articles when they have sort of a noise element to them. And one in particular by a researcher called Katie Hemsworth, who's done some research in the area of sensory criminology, really turned on a light bulb for me. And then reading more research and literature from people in that area made me think that there's a lot of important learning that someone in my profession could use when thinking about designing acoustics in prisons. So how could sensory criminology inform the acoustic design? Well, it's hard to sum up sensory criminology on one slide. We've gone into a lot more detail in the paper, but basically the second point here is the interesting part, or the key part. Sensory criminologists investigate how people in prisons use and experience the acoustic qualities of the space. It could be in affirmative ways, it could be in efforts of protest, or manipulative ways, like people that don't have agency or control over their situation. They're physically detained. The spaces are designed to restrict visual connection. One area and way that they can have an influence or express themselves or exert power can be to control the acoustic environment, and that's what happens. So it's the takeaway message here is that it's a complicated acoustic environment, and there's a lot of wants and needs from both the incarcerated people in prison and the staff as well. So typically, acoustics is a consideration on the design of new prison projects, but in terms of guidance around what acceptable design goals are for a prison, depending on where the project is, whether it's a prison or a residential or a healthcare type project, the jurisdiction where the project sits will determine what the requirements are around providing acoustic quality. And there is not generally a prison-specific acoustic design guide available. So what happens is acoustic consultants pull guidance from a range of different non-carceral related sources and apply those to the project. That's what happens typically. And if you think about what's happening there, we're doing that in a competitive tender type process. So the project owner has given us the opportunity to tender on providing the acoustic design advice. So what we're interested in doing is helping that client navigate the regulatory framework, going through the gates they need to and ticking the boxes that they need to in the quickest, most effective way and the cheapest way. So depending on the brief, there might be some guidance from the project owner about what their expectations around quality of the result might be, but a lot of the time it's effectively negotiating a regulatory framework. And so if you think about that as an approach, and then the fact that just before we outlined how complex the noise environment inside a prison is, you can see that we could be missing things. We're using standards that are designed for residential and healthcare spaces when they might not really be appropriate. So what are we saying here? We've identified what we think is a gap that potentially we could really utilise learning from a complementary discipline to help inform our approach. And then, what are we going to do about that? Well, perhaps one idea would be to develop a prison-specific design guideline, and you see those pop up for education, schools, healthcare facilities. So they generally end up a bit of a bricks and mortar type approach where you provide enough mass to stop noise moving between spaces and some sort of treatment to control reverberation. I suspect, looking into that sort of approach, I think we probably end up going beyond that to some kind of technology-based intervention where you can use some of these commonly available sort of technologies that are happening around the place already, like low-cost sensor networks and machine learning, to maybe the bricks and mortar approach, close everything off, lots of mass, deaden everything down, and then apply an active system to it so you can tailor the system to the needs of maybe by cell, depending on who you have. And once you understand who you've got in your cohort, you could even maybe use that to develop tools that the correction staff might be able to use, because not all of them have been there long enough to really be able to hear when something's happening. And so we think that's probably where it might become a combination of those things. But at the moment, we're just trying to, keen to talk to people and collaborate and sort of do more research and thinking about this problem. And anyway, that's just been a quick overview. So thanks for listening. Bye.
It looks like we have one question from Carrie Seeger. She says, I assume some noises made are clanging, like metal on metal, and that buildings are largely concrete. If this is true, how to deal with echoes in machine learning sensors?
So that's a good question. Thank you. Yeah. So you can control those sorts of reflections and echoey type effects, but typically how that's done is you need to start with a fairly dead environment. So it's easy to electronically, well, not easy, but it's fairly common technology now to be able to add reflection, make a room feel bigger, but it's very difficult to try and electronically go the other way. So that's why I was thinking, and I'm not trying to have the answers at the moment exactly on what the approach is, because I think that's part of the problem, rushing to the answer. But anyway, generally in terms of that sort of reflection, hard surface type echoey issue, you really need to try and start off with a dead space. If we had a couple of minutes, part of the really interesting part of this study that I didn't really go into too much in that presentation was just some of the insights into who's in prison and the cohort. And Helen Farley's here, and I wondered if we had a couple of minutes, Helen might just talk to that part of it. That's really.
Avery says, what are some of the unique ways that people in prison environments use sound and noise?
So the interesting part for us is the differences. So acousticians generally look at residential type receivers, but if you think about people in prison, one way that they use acoustics is as a sort of a self-preservation. These places can be dangerous and violent places. So people can be on alert. Listening is a key sense. They're sort of alert for things, noises that stand out, like the scrape of a chair, all these sorts of things. They're really, really listening. And so back to the previous question, the reverberant sort of nature of the day rooms might be actually useful for people in prison, incarcerated people. And we're not just talking about incarcerated people, we're also interested in shaping the experience for the correction staff, because there's evidence in the literature where people who experience stuff, they call it feeling the range, so they can hear when things are about to kick off, like something's a bit quiet, or they just get to know that they're with those people a lot. They get to know, so that the staff are really listening, and so you can see how there's lots of interesting information in this literature for someone like me, because when I read a lot of this research about from sensory criminology about these sorts of things, about how people are using and experiencing the acoustics, it's fascinating for me. There's a lot of interesting information for someone like me.